My fellow cultural whateverers, welcome to Salon number whatever it is. It's a great pleasure to be here. Thank you. How many of you have been down to the sandlot where the Strandbeests are to be seen? How many of you have no idea what I'm talking about? Okay, so we are here today to have this conversation apropos of, I hope, sort of the most spectacular, most interesting project that you'll see here this week in Miami, arguably, not just arguably, definitively, which is the marvelous creations of Theo Jansen, who for the last 25 years has labored on evolving what he would call a new species of animals. These are moving, roving, beach-inhabiting, wonderful kinetic sculptures, as we would call them in the art world, or as you'll probably hear in other worlds, they might be given other names. They're mesmerizing, they're absolutely entrancing objects of great meaning. About a year and a half ago, it was my privilege to connect the two partners in this initiative that bought the Strandbeest here, the Peabody Essex Museum, whose curator of the present tense, Trevor Smith, will moderate this dialogue, and Audemars Piguet, the Swiss watch company, which is an associate partner of Art Basel, and was very interested in doing an amazing project here. I think the outcome of this collaboration between the artist and, of course, Lena Herzog, who's been collaborating with Theo as a photographer, documenting and making her own images inspired by this work. The collaboration of these various parties, the artists, the museum, and Audemars Piguet has been a wonderfully fertile collaboration which has allowed these wonderful Strandbeests to arrive to America in anticipation of their opening at the Peabody Essex Museum, to arrive on America's most iconic beach. And every day during Art Basel at 10:30 and 4:30 in the afternoon, you can see them running around, moving around, and much of the day you can come and see Theo working and observe everything that goes on. So those of you who haven't been, I assume those of you who have been, one of the reasons you're here is because you were awestruck by what you saw. But those of you who haven't, you should all go. And my role is really at this point just to hand it over to Trevor and to Lena and to Theo and have a wonderful conversation so you can get a sense of what animates these animated creatures. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Andras, for that extraordinarily generous introduction. It is indeed my pleasure to be here with Theo Jansen and Lena Herzog, whom I've been sharing an extraordinary adventure the last 3 years, trying to think about how to bring the Strandbeests to America. And this week marks not only the debut of the Strandbeests on North American soil, walking the wide sand expanses of Miami Beach, but it also marks the launch of Lena Herzog's extraordinary new book, Strandbeests, The Dream Machines of Theo Jansen. So it's really been an amazing moment, a culmination for all of us, a culmination of a dream that began some 24 years ago, way before either of us had ever heard of the Strandbeests, of course. Do you want to talk to us a little bit about the origins of the beast? Where did the idea first emerge for you?
Well, it was, in fact, by reading a book. It was a book by Richard Dawkins called The Blind Watchmaker. And I read it in 1988, I think. And there were so much examples of evolution in there that I wanted to to create evolution. So I created computer programs of little animals which were living on the computer screen, which would evolve by themselves. They would find their own strategy to survive best, but just by multiplying and by selection. Now, after writing these computer programs, I got this idea after, I used to be a writer in those days, and I used to write columns for a newspaper, which in the science part, and those columns were always a bit about well, extreme point of view on science, a sort of fairy tale-like look on science. And one of those ideas I wrote about was about skeletons on the beach, which were driven by the wind, who would gather sand to build up dunes. So they would protect the country, in fact, for the rise of the sea level in the coming century. So I wanted to save the country, like it's in our Dutch genes to always to be afraid of water, and that would be a sort of solution to help us. Now, a long time nothing happened, and then I passed, by coincidence, this tool shop, and I saw these tubes, and I bought some of these yellow cheese-colored tubes, and I played for an afternoon with it. And after that afternoon, I had seen so many things in there that I decided to spend 1 year on the tubes. And that got really out of hand because it's 24 years ago.
So what are those tubes usually used for?
Well, my first meeting with the tubes was as a young boy. These tubes are used for power lines in houses. So cables run through it, and by law you have to use this in my country in walls of houses. But it's on the street as well. So as a kid, I used to blow paper darts in open windows with this kind of tube. So it's already a long time in my life.
So having embarked on this process of playing with the tubes, and you've now been doing this for 24 years, at some point the focus shifted for you, didn't it? Like at first the idea was putting the sand up on the dunes as you've just described, but that shifted. Sure.
So after a few years working on this sort of beast, and I noticed that these beasts were due to an evolution, just like in a real evolution. Every time I tried a new mutation, and most of them don't work, but by trying it, you're pushed in a certain way, and then it develops more or less. Now, after a few years, I decided to go more into the principle of evolution, more looking for the roots of life, and maybe become wiser concerning the existing forms of life, because I noticed that I met the same problems which the real creator must have met by making us. And so while doing this, I had this idea that I became wise. I started writing about evolution, and I forgot all about saving the country for the rise of the sea level. It didn't seem to be important anymore because I was looking for the roots of life. And so that was a big change. And during the years, the beasts evolved, and they don't have to eat. They get their energy from the wind. So they don't waste their time looking for food, and they run on the beach, and then they have to survive the storms and the wind silences and also the water. So I tried during the years to create an animal which can do on their own. So still, after 24 years, I have to nurse them all the time. But every year there comes a new beast which the experiments which I do in the summer on the beach. Every time there comes a new animal out, and it's getting better and better. And I hope to spend the next 20 years to make the animal independent from me, so they can live on their own on the beach, on that specific beach in the town I was born, in Scheveningen. I was born almost on that beach, and I hope to end on that beach as well, that these animals, before I leave the planet, that I add a new specimen to this world, and that these animals live on their own in the future.
So could you talk to us a little bit about, okay, so you have this long arc of evolution, but each year you develop a new species in order to kind of test new survival capacities. So how does that annual cycle work for you? When does the next beast begin?
Yeah, every spring I bring a new animal to the beach, and during the summer I test it on wind, on keeping course, trying to detect the hardness of the sand, so it can navigate more or less on the beach. You must imagine that these animals are blind and they are deaf, and they can't have to navigate somehow by the hardness of the sand. So there are senses to the beach as well, and and then comes the fall, and I declare the animal extinct. So I push it on the boneyard, and during the last few years, the boneyard is adopted by exhibitions, traveling exhibitions in the Far East and in France, and this exhibition here. Because I had forgot to tell something basic to you, is that I just want to use this kind of tube. So I restrict myself just in the choice of my materials. I just use this cheese-colored tube to make my new nature, and that, of course, is different from making normal robots, which are usually made of steel or carbon fiber, whatever, and electric sensors. Now I want to make all the senses of the beast and all for instance, the feet, all by this one material, also the joints. And that somehow you would say it's a restriction, but it brings you further. It forces you to take escapes which are not very obvious. So it brings you to places where nobody has been before.
So I wonder if I could turn to you now, Lena, because you've been photographing Theo and the beasts for about 7 years now. Could you describe for us a little bit how you first encountered the beast? How did you and Theo meet?
I wrote to Theo out of the blue that I was going to be in Holland because my previous project called Lost Souls had one of the lost stopped nearby in Delft, because I was photographing in Utrecht, in Leiden, and in Delft. And I knew I was going to be nearby. So I wrote to him. I saw videos online before and said, can I come and see? And he said, sure, why not? So I didn't really expect very much. I thought it would be just a short visit. And Theo was working on some of the leg movements. The beast didn't hatch yet. It was still, evolving. And the little that I saw, I thought it was just marvelous. I also was finishing a project on Cabinets of Wonder and Curiosities, which is very dark. And it's an exploration of wonder. I went through and photographed in over 17 Cabinets of Wonder and Curiosities, otherwise known as Wunderkammern. And much of that work is pretty dark side of wonder. And when I saw Theo's Strandbeest, I thought, well, this is beautiful. This is really a light side of wonder. And it felt very satisfying. And so that was the first encounter. And the first encounter was also the first decision to have that as a project. And that's how it started.
And when you first saw one of the beasts move, could you just kind of walk through for us, kind of describe the feelings you were having as you're looking at this creature on the beach? Because I think all of us have a very similar kind of response to your work, Theo.
Yeah. Well, it's an instant enchantment. And it's also a very peculiar reaction because it's simultaneously striking and lingering. You know, a lot of things are just striking. They strike you and they leave you instantaneously. Billboards, advertising, frankly, a lot of art is like that. Just strikes you and you close your eyes and you forgot what it was all about. There are quite a few things that slowly make their way into you and on low flame keep you going. But extremely rarely you see something that strikes you and lingers. There's also a fascinating thing, a range of not only emotional references, because they're sophisticated, but they're very simple and childish. They're very witty, but they're also very serious. And there's also intellectual range and artistic art history range, at least for me. And you immediately think of Leonardo da Vinci drawings, sketches for the machines, Panamarenko, Gerrit von Buckel, but it's also something completely original. So something that's all very archaic and yet very futuristic at the same time also has that incredible power of sort of capturing you. Another thing I was wondering about was the Bauhaus and Laszlo Moholy-Nagy and their fascination with kinetic sculptures.
Indeed.
You know, Laszlo Moholy-Nagy wrote a book on sculpture, and the fifth and final progressive step for sculpture was going to be kinetic. So, and here it was.
There we go. The other things that sort of strike me about the materiality of the creatures is that, you know, you were talking about this before, Theo, the idea of like wanting to hold to a single material and not, like, the idea of kinetic objects, of things that move on, that transport or move from place to place are often made up of these kinds of compound technologies. I mean, we've known how to make things move for centuries, for millennia. And then you see these objects and they're just made out of these pipes. Like you talk about them as artistic protein in a way, like all of our bodies are made up of the basic element of life, which is protein, and so for the beasts, it's these plastic tubes are their protein. But you can also think of that in terms of the modernist idea of media specificity. Now, you sometimes you refer to yourself, or you've talked about your relationship to these beasts in a couple of very strikingly different ways. One of which is, you know, as the creator, as a kind of a god, if you will, but also as their slave. And I think that idea of being the slave to the beast kind of connects to that idea of the media specificity and pushing the limits of it. But I wonder if you could talk a little bit about your relationship to these tubes. Like what happens in the studio? You come in with an idea.
Yes, these strange tubes, they came into my life a long time ago, and they rule my life, you could say. You can imagine I wake up in the morning with an ingenious idea about every morning. Somehow that happens. I have an ingenious idea, and then I go to my studio, and then during the day it turns out that my ingenious idea is not that ingenious as it was in the morning, because these tubes, they protest. They don't want to realize my idea because there's a limitation in their possibilities. They don't want to do what I want to do. So they protest and they push me, in fact, to another way. You could also say they point me in another way. So at the end of the day, I go home more or less depressed, but then I go to sleep, and in the night something happens. It's something, radiation from the cosmos. And in the morning, I'm very optimistic, without reason, in fact. But I'm optimistic, and I'm going to my studio again with an ingenious idea. And in fact, the tubes, they point me where to go. So the road is very capricious, you could say. It goes not from A to B in a straight line, and it's hard to predict where you're going to go. But at the end, you could wonder if it were my ideas in the tubes. No, it were the ideas of the tubes which are realized. And usually, the beast doesn't, well, it functions a bit, because I am always looking for this function. But when I look back, then I see a beautiful animal. And somehow I don't have the feeling that I did that. So you could say I have to obey the tubes, and they dictate what I have to do. I cannot dictate the tubes because they are limited in their possibilities. So by this limitation, it brings me further than I would be able to buy everything what I need to realize my idea. Then you go in a straight line, you could say.
So Lena, when I look at your photographs, I can see not only the emphasis on the kind of extraordinary geometries and structures of the creatures, but I think what's most powerful and eloquent about the work is the way that you have captured Theo's relationships to the beasts. The idea of Theo at work, struggling with the tubes, struggling with these creations. I wonder if, like, I know that you would travel every year back to the Hague and go to the beach. Walk us through a day with Theo.
You know, I have a bit of a similar experience with work taking over. You create something and you have very much illusion of control and authorship and agency, and then all of a sudden you feel like it's starting to creep into every aspect of your life and takes you over. I know a lot of writers have the same feeling about their novels and characters, and they speak about them as family members that, you know, quarrel with them, even though they are the ones created them.
Curators too, by the way.
Yes. Right. So, I would come with a very clear idea to the beach, a very strict, ingenious idea what it is that I want to photograph. And I come back with something completely different. And what is also fascinating is that I have much less time to hide myself than Theo. Because Theo tinkers and corrects and tinkers and corrects. Now, I work in 125th of a second. So 1 second divided by 125 times, and that's the fraction within which I work and have to deliver something. And to say something about one man and a bunch of pipes, photographically, and try to translate the kind of after image and dream of it. And of course, it is at odds with the nature of what photography is, which is evidence. It's evidentiary. You cannot photograph what's not there. So how do you photograph a dream? Because that's really what interests me much more than anything else. And so, and it's daily sort of routine. Sand gets into my camera bag, and salty spray is very dangerous for the lenses. So I'm constantly in panic, in a state of panic, to try to deliver something that is true to Strandbeest, to Theo, and to what I see. it's very actually hard to describe that. And once in a while, when I come back and I see the whole work over the years, I see, first of all, influences that I've had in my life, you know, things that have obsessed me, Caspar David Friedrich, or Goya, or Leonardo da Vinci sketches, and things like this. I can see that, you know, this had coalesced within that fraction of a second over there. And I also see how reality, this mundane reality and the moments and the flicker of a light, that 1 second or fraction of that second, changed everything around and defied me and defied my ingenious ideas.
Both of you work with ideas that neither of you is trying exactly to make, you know, work that we would call contemporary with a capital C. It's very much work that moves through time, that makes references through history, not in a way of making a point exactly, but rather you really sense this immersion in the flow. So for you, Theo, as someone whose studio is in Delft, thinking about like not only the rich Dutch artistic history, but also the rich scientific history that Michael Friedman from Audemars Piguet and we were discussing yesterday. Like, you're clearly aware of that, of those histories, but how conscious are you when you're working? Does that inspire you in particularly direct ways?
Well, you could say that the landscape which I'm working with the skies in Holland, they have sort of reflection which I think is specific for that region. So Delft, in fact, where I used to live a long time, is Vermeer's city. And of course, I recognize the skies of Vermeer. And they're also on the beach. So when I'm alone on that beach, of course, I have to think of this landscape tradition in Holland. And maybe my work, because video is a part of my work. I want to make the videos on the beach often myself. And so I put the camera on the tripod and I run the beast in front of the camera with the clouds in the background. And I like to do that. So this is a sort of living painting, you could say. And it refers, in fact, to the old tradition of landscape.
And so coming here to Miami, you know, you've like, what's that?
I want to answer about capital C. Contemporary with a capital C. You know, it's very interesting. Part of the reason that I was so attracted to Theo's work is that it doesn't desperately, self-consciously try the pose of innovation. And I always felt that with the work that never made an impression on me in contemporary art was this extreme effort at innovation at all costs, which frequently feels like a pose, and it's boring. So very early on, I made a decision that innovation per se in art is a vanity move. It has to happen on its own. The only primary thing is idea and staying true to the original idea of your work. And with all the artists that I've ever admired, James Turrell, or I just saw Roscoe, very beautiful work here, very striking. They really start with a thought and an idea. rather than
idea
some
that's
sort of a career
grounded.
move within the
Yeah.
art market.
It's actually grounded in daily life,
Yeah.
in experience, and I love the way that you describe those videos that you shoot on the beach as kind of like being akin to landscape paintings. The Vermeer skies behind the beast walking down the beach. So we're here in Miami Beach, and you've been watching and working with the beasts all week, just over here. What have you noticed about the beaches of Miami, the relationship of your Strandbeests to this environment?
Well, in fact, when you're on the beach and you see the clouds there and the wind there, you don't think that there's an art fair just a few kilometers away. In fact, the people on the beach, they don't react like art collectors. They are just normal people. They are kids walking around, and they react to my work. And I don't have a preference in the sort of people I want to look at my work. Everybody is welcome between, let's say, 3 years old and, well, 100. Okay. But,
okay, so if I'm 101...
Younger than 3, they get a bit afraid. So I don't like to have those kids around. But so I don't have a preference for an audience. And they seem to... It also seems the other way around, that people just... the people who like my work are not specific art people. There are workers or security people around the venue, and so normal people. And I see this as a big privilege, that my work is understood by normal people. It means that that I don't have to do things specially to come in the art world. And in fact, it would be nice if what I want to say is, if I show my work, of course, they're in a sort of art stage, and I like that, because people looking at my work as art, they usually look at it with more imagination. So they're pushing the button of imagination, looking at my work. That is important for me. So that's why I prefer to show my work in an art environment. But that's totally different, of course, than an art fair. An art fair is a market where a lot of money is going around. There's not going... I didn't see people paying there. So there was not much money around there. And still, people enjoyed the works, which I really appreciate that.
So, something that we've talked about in the past is your work is structured by the idea of evolution, which with each species succeeding the next and onward as you try to build capacities in the beast. But you have a dream that these beasts will live on after you, and therefore the beasts need to reproduce themselves in a way, not only through the actions that you yourself make as you're testing and experimenting with the individual beasts, but how those beasts affect the people who see them.
Well, of course, I want this beast to live after I'm gone, and so I need to have a crew who is working on this beast after I'm gone. So I try to hypnotize people now already, to especially young people, and to let them work after I'm dead. But somehow the Strandbeests found their own way behind my back to reproduce. And I just noticed it a year ago, because I would like to tell you how they did that. So the autonomy of the Strandbeest is based on a proportion of 13 numbers. And the 13 numbers has to do with the length of the tubes. And the special thing about Strandbeests is that they walk in a way that they don't toss up and down. Normally, and all other animals go up and down, but the Strandbeests stay on the same level. And that has to do with this 13 proportion of length. And you could see this as the DNA code of the Strandbeests. And I published this secret of the Strandbeest on my website a long time ago. Since then, thousands of students in the whole world are making Strandbeests. And they're small, they are big, usually about this size. And all these students have the feeling that they're having a good time and a nice hobby to make this Strandbeest. But in fact, they are used for the Strandbeest reproduction. So the Strandbeests, I abuse students to make them. And this new kind of Strandbeest, which I didn't notice that it was coming, they produce themselves very, very fast at the moment. And they appear in all corners of the world. And they found a new habitat. They found a way to survive the storms. They survive in student rooms, on bookshelves. And so they don't have to fight the storms anymore.
And in my book.
Sorry?
And in my book.
And then in your book, yes. So it seems that they, independently from me, they did it all themselves. And I see that this idea of the Strandbeest, in fact, is a virus which came into my brain 24 years ago, and it made me a slave of them, but it's infective to other people as well. So that, in fact, they are taking over the world. This is a warning to you.
I think that's a good moment to maybe open up this conversation for all of you. Do you have another mic?
I have a question along the lines of what you just brought up. To begin with, your objects, your beasts, are beautiful, as you mentioned, and they do linger. But what is really breathtaking is when you show them to someone in a video and you hit play, and suddenly the motion happens. And what is beautiful is even more beautiful in motion. So tell us a little more about how you came to unlock this secret of the legs and also of the cam motions, which are so beautiful together.
Well, I think that to get these 13 numbers, I had to write a program in a computer, which is based on evolution. And I used, in fact, the mechanics of walking, that one of the criteria these legs had to survive was that they shouldn't spend too much time in the air. So when a leg is going fast through the air back to the ground fast, those legs got more descendants than other legs. And that means that they have a special movement, which it goes like this, on the ground, fast through the air. And I think real animals do the same thing. They also, to find balance and support, they do this. So they are a bit similar to real animals' motion. Not for aesthetic reasons, but for mechanical reasons. And somehow our brain is very sensitive for motion of walking or body movement, that even in the corner of your eye you see something moving like an animal. You're very sensitive for that because it might be danger for you or just something to eat. So that's why I think there's a wonder in people looking at my animals, that they see an animal, but it's a mechanical thing. And that brings up a contrast, sort of this, something in a friction in our brain. There's something strange happening here. I had to think also of when you attach LED lights on your limbs, on all the corners of your limbs, and you see it at a screen in the dark. You see just these LED lights, just a bunch of lights. But as soon as the person starts moving, you really recognize the movement of a body. And that's something in our brain, because of evolution, of course, that recognizes this immediately. That's also the way it works with my animals.
There's a question here in the middle, Mary.
Thank you. They are very anthropomorphic, and I've already fallen in love with the beasts. My question is about your own evolution. You said you were a writer when this started, and it sounds like what you're doing sort of defies categorization. And I just wondered if you think of yourself as an artist or a mad scientist or an engineer, a designer, all of the above?
Well, all kind of labeling which you put on a person is based on institutes, like museums or art institutes or universities. And when I'm on this beach under the clouds and I'm working there, sometimes all on my own, these institutes don't really matter. So at that moment, it's a trivial question. But of course, as I mentioned before, I would like to show my work in an art environment. Then of course I have to call myself an artist to show it to the world. But it's just an envelope, a piece of paper which you put on my back and write artists on it.
Can I just ask a practical question? We go down Collins Ave to Ocean Drive. Where do we go to actually see it if we want to go see it?
So if you walk up Collins Avenue and you turn right on 22nd Street, we're right next to the beach. We're between 21st and 22nd Avenue, right next to the W Hotel is the entrance. And in fact, in about 30 minutes, we're going to be back on the beach, and Theo is going to walk the Strandbeests again. So I would like to draw this conversation to a close. Before I do so, I just want to mention that I just want to thank again Audemars Piguet for their marvelous sponsorship with the Peabody Essex Museum. I have to say that this public-private partnership has been really unique in my experience and a very, very satisfying creative endeavor. Lena Herzog, who had dreamed of bringing the Strandbeests to this country far before I'd even heard of them. And for those of you who will be flying out of Miami to return to your homes in other cities, the Peabody Essex Museum is putting together a tour of the Strandbeests that will open at PEM in the fall of 2015. Thank you.
Trees at night, sparkling